As we journey with Jesus through the Gospel of Luke, we hear parable after parable. Last week, to illustrate the certainty of praying, Father, hallowed be your name, we heard the parable of the friend who, because of friendship and because of the persistence of the one knocking on the door at such a late hour, even though it was late and the doors were locked and the lamps were dark and the kids were already and finally asleep, will surely get up and give whatever is asked. Knock, and the door shall be opened. Today, to illustrate Jesus' teaching about possessions, we hear a parable about a rich man who is blessed with abundance and instead of thinking of others, thinks only of himself, of building bigger barns in order to hoard more and more earthly treasure for many years to come, only to find that very night his life would end. What then of the things stored away? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. While we hear this parable in response to someone asking Jesus to tell the man's brother to divide the family inheritance fairly, the larger context in which we should hear it is the opening passage of Luke's 12th chapter, which the lectionary leaves out, and in which Jesus is in the middle of teaching about the need for faithfulness in times of trial, and specifically persecution, perhaps one's very life. He is on his way to Jerusalem, after all, and to his disciples and the crushing crowd he cautions, I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body and after that can do no more. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after your body has been killed, has authority to throw you into hell. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. After which, the gospel abruptly shifts from this profound teaching to, someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. Someone who, instead of listening to what Jesus was saying, had apparently just been waiting for the opportunity to interrupt. Thinking only of himself, the man demands Jesus to help him get his fair share of an inheritance. It seems a bit off topic at best. Except Jesus was a rabbi, and in the first century, religion, law, and communal life were nearly inseparable. It would not be that unusual for someone with a question about such a matter to consult with a rabbi. And except the man surely knew that Jesus was not only a rabbi, but a miracle worker. If Jesus could cure the lame and give sight to the blind, surely he could soften his brother's heart. And except this is Luke's gospel, in which nearly every chapter Jesus speaks somehow about the use or misuse of wealth, because the kingdom that Jesus came to proclaim and for which he would die does not operate by earning and amassing wealth, but is based instead on an astonishing economy of grace, in which our sins are freely forgiven and our reconciliation to God received through the profound and costly gift of the cross. And except money is always about more than money, because there's something about it that clouds our vision and distorts our hearts and distracts us from hearing the outrageousness of such an economy, where God never stops giving, where even when God's people turn away, as we hear today in the continuing story of the prophet Hosea, God still sees them as like children to be loved, to be taught how to walk, to be lifted up in God's almighty loving arms and healed, to be fed at God's breast. God who wails, how can I give you up? How can I hand you over? God whose self-giving love is as gentle as one who lifts an infant to the cheek and as fierce as a roaring lion. Through the prophet Hosea, God reveals the extraordinarily rich character of God's passion in all too human words. The great I am crying, I loved, I taught, I held, I healed, I led, I bent down, I fed. Like any concerned and loving parent, God mourns and laments, struggles with mixed feelings of outrage and compassion, anger, anguish, and concern, and ultimately comes down on the side of love. Because despite the waywardness of God's children, God loves. Because God is love. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God. While we may have a different understanding of God's love than the Israelites of Hosea's time, and though we would not want to admit it, we are often wayward ourselves, individually and as a nation, worshiping not wooden idols, but idols still to which we turn away from God in order to follow. Success, independence, money, guns, supremacy, power. We would do well to ask ourselves in the present tense and always, where are we turning away from God? Surely God grieves over the vast and ever-widening gap in this country between the rich and the poor, the institutionalization of for-profit prison systems, the granting to corporations the same rights as persons, the privileging of private enterprise over the common good. The uncomfortable reading from the prophet Hosea asks us to consider an equally uncomfortable truth: our complacency and our complicity in our nation's waywardness. For as the prophet Henry David Thoreau rightly noted in his essay on civil disobedience, dissent without action is consent. Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, Jesus tells the man who interrupts his teaching and demands he help in garnering the inheritance held by his brother. Jesus, whose love, like his Father's, is both tender and fierce, who in Luke's 13th chapter is depicted as a mother hen lovingly gathering her brood under her wings, and who in the revelation of St. John is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Jesus saw right through the man's demand, that it was not a legal issue or one of fairness, but that the real problem was his greed, and how greed turns our hearts away from God and each other and the kingdom Jesus came to proclaim. Something Paul also notes in his letter to the Colossians, that greed itself is a kind of idolatry, and one that ought to be put to death lest it rule lives, and not just those of the Colossians, but our 21st century American lives, immersed as we are in a culture and economy that is fiercely driven by greed, where enough is never enough according to the false idol of consumerism. Then Jesus told them a parable, and what a parable it is. The only parable in all of the Gospels in which God shows up, not in some metaphorical or symbolic way, but as God's very self, and says, "You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" Importantly, it was not the rich person who made the abundant harvest happen. We are told in the text that the land of a rich man produced abundantly. He ought to have been on his knees thanking God and sharing his good fortune, but instead he wonders, what should I do? I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. I will store all my grain. I will tell my soul to relax, eat, drink, and be merry. I. The paradox of this parable, which is often called the parable of the rich fool, is the real poverty that comes from greed, the way it leads us into the sin of separateness and self-centeredness. In God's economy, the gift of abundance is not meant to be stored up, but shared. Love of neighbor is the true mutual fund in which we ought to be investing, not storing up treasure for ourselves in some earthly barn, but investing in the ultimate bank account of life lived together and for the glory of God. Jesus concludes the parable with this admonishment: "So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." What does such a phrase mean, we should wonder, to be rich toward God? Our gospel reading hints that it means guarding against greed instead of obsessing over fairness. But there's much more richness in that phrase, I believe, if we consider it further. Being rich toward God means valuing the same things God values. It means lavishing forgiveness, mercy, and loving kindness upon each other, God's children, like a parent lifting an infant to their cheek. It means loving God with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind and all our strength, It means committing ourselves to a life in common, a life of prayer and Bible study, fellowship and ministry with each other as we seek to follow Jesus Christ and learn from him together. It means depositing our lives and all we have, our entire being in Christ, into that heavenly bank account where the treasure stored within is our redemption, our relatedness, and our return to God, bought and paid for with the blood of God's only Son. It means repenting of the sin of self-sufficiency, that we don't need God and we don't need each other, and going all in for the kingdom, living with confidence, hope, and trust in God, no matter what. Every investment requires trust, including the deposit of our lives in Jesus Christ. When we put money in Franklin Savings or any bank, we trust the bank to keep it safe for us. It is guaranteed by a federal agency. If we can trust in that, surely we can trust in the agency and the kingdom, the power, and the glory of God. I know we live in uncertain times, all the more to put our trust in God. For there is space enough for any need we will ever have in the great I Am, a universe of loving kindness in those two little words of that most holy name. Because, my friends, God's got tomorrow, and it's going to be all right, and it's going to be enough, more than enough. So, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Amen.